Well, thank you for joining. Welcome to this first session of webinar in the Navigating Marine Conservation Career. This is going to be the first session of a series of webinars that will be organized by the SCB Marine section. And the overall objective of these webinars are to equip students and early careers with insight to diverse the way they see the conservation career, to equip them with essential skills and to also provide them with mentoring opportunities. Today, we are very happy to have you online and also to have two, huge guest speakers, Austin and Kara, who are going to share their insight, who are going to inspire you, who are going to give you what they have gone through to be where they are today and to lead you in the conservation research and action. Austin is the lead scientist at the Dolphin Quest, and he's going to share knowledge about bridging research and impact, and tell us how to have a career, a marine science career beyond the traditional tracks. Austin will also take us through his master and PhD journey and the transition he has had to find himself at Dolphin Quest, combining research and grant making as well as networking. He may also tell us a bit about small citation. While Dr. Kara Gallagher will be taking us through her journey at the Aarhus University in Denmark, and we'll also explore with her how to ride the wave of possibility in marine science. Austin, I'm going to start leaving it to you so you can share your screen and inspire the students and early career here.
Thank you, Cedric. All right. Let's see how well this works. All right. Trying to share it in presenter view. Let's see. Do you see just the slides or also the notes? Just the slides?
Yes.
Looks good.
All right. Yeah, thank you. Excited to be here and share some of my experiences, and a lot of the background and everything is in the talk, so I'll just jump in. I'm going to talk a little bit about my background, starting from college, and then my current role at Dolphin Quest. And there'll be some takeaways, hopefully useful throughout, and then I'll kind of summarize a little bit at the end. So like many of you listening, I fell in love with the ocean when I was a child, but my first real taste of marine science was during college, where I went to William & Mary on the east coast of the US, and they have a local marine institute called VIMS there. And they have a long-term shark research project, and they had many, many pages of handwritten notes on length measurements of the sharks. So I volunteered on the weekends typing up that data into spreadsheets. So it was not the most exciting work, but it got my foot in the door, and I met some different professors there. And one of them suggested this program that I didn't know about, provided by the National Science Foundation in the US. And that's a research experience for undergraduates, which pays for a summer program to dive into a research topic. So I applied and received one for VIMS. And so I got to spend a summer with these guys. These little diamondback terrapins are this little turtle that gets caught in the blue crab pots. And there's these excluder devices on the crab pots to let the crabs in but keep the turtles out. And so I was measuring the crab catch in pots with and without excluders. And I absolutely loved it. I loved being dirty in the marsh, and I loved getting to collect the data and write it up and see the graph of the data you collected for the first time. So I was really hooked on research at that point, and I thought that I was going to go straight into research after undergrad. Oh, and this was me collecting measurements, crab measurements, many moons ago. But like all of us, my life had some detours, and right after undergraduate, my brother had a snowboarding accident, and I spent 2.5 years um, with him in 30 hospitals helping him recover. And I worked at a local zoo to be nearby, just to keep working with around animals. But I learned a lot about myself through that process and what I wanted to do. And in talking with other people, I think that having some years in between undergrad and graduate school, if that's what you want to pursue, I think really helps. It helped me get more out of the graduate program when I decided to go to it. So I found a master's program also on the US East Coast at Duke University, and it was a little different than a research focused master's. It had a bit of policy and a bit of science and a lot of coursework. And as part of it, we did get to spend a couple semesters on a research project. So I focused on trying to identify squid species that pilot whales and tuna both ate to eventually try to figure out what trophic level they were eating at. It spent a lot of time. I got a lot of tuna stomachs from fishers and then dissected the squid beaks or the stomachs and tried to identify them under the microscope. And I loved it. I got a lot of autonomy there to practice working on my own. And we did not get enough data for it to be published. And I think that's a common theme you'll hear from many people that of all the research projects we start, many of them are not going to work for various reasons. And as long as you hopefully learn something from that project and learn a little bit about what you like or don't like and make some new collaborations, it can still be useful time spent. But my friend and I had a side project where we ground up microplastics and fed them to corals and then saw how much they spit back out. And that project, we took all the way through to publication, and it got a lot of press and helped launch the microplastic coral, some research there. And that was really, he's still, yeah, one of my best friends. And so I say that to say, you know, if you have time, seek out some side projects. You never know which ones are going to be more useful than the thing that you are really focused on. So after the master's, I was thinking about what to do next. And, there are many career paths where a bachelor's and a master's is plenty to do marine science. But I really liked the entirety of the research arc. And I also saw myself considering a director of research type role at a zoo or aquarium and realized I needed a PhD for that. So I would think really carefully before jumping into a PhD. I put in this for a little bit of levity, but it's, the PhD can be very stressful and it is a huge commitment of time and sacrifice compared to some other things you could do. So, but it can also be very, very rewarding, and I'm really glad that I did pursue it. But I just say that to say if, getting into one is half the battle, but before you commit, I would try to really make sure you can meet the advisor and meet with students of theirs to figure out what the work-life balance is like and, you know, try to figure out as much as you can before committing to 3, 5+ years. So I'll touch on a little bit of what I did during the PhD before jumping to Dolphin Quest. to my role there. So I was really interested in this question if boats in these urban environments where boats might be going by dolphins all the time, if they swim a little faster some of the time, could that cause them to use up too many calories? And there's this population in Florida where we have this long-term data set of these suction cup attached tags that tell us about their movement. And we learn a lot from these tags, but to get to calories, we need some sort of ground truthing calibration. So this is kind of the question I was interested in. If we can measure the acceleration on the tag, can we predict the energy expenditure? And if this bar is how many calories it often uses in a day, could avoiding boats be a negligible amount or could it be a substantial amount? And I know Kara is also going to talk about some energetics. So it's got a lot of energetics and marine mammals today. But so this led me to Dolphin Quest, where there's an accredited facility here with bottlenose dolphins, and we could do some really neat experiments where we have them wear a tag and swim underwater and breathe into a device that measures oxygen consumption, which we can convert to metabolic rate. So here's what this looks like, measuring their resting metabolic rate and then asking them to swim. And on different days, we ask them to swim faster or slower to get a range of activity levels. And they come back, and all of this is voluntary, and the trainers have to make it fun for the dolphins. They have a much more challenging job than I did. So we published this correlation, and then taking it back to the boats, this paper is actually really close to being submitted. Sometimes the PhD chapters can live on outside of the PhD. In this population, this community, we did not find that they were spending more energy avoiding vessels. They probably are using different avoidance tactics when they need to. But we can use this correlation, and we have used it to answer other questions from this, related to foraging and some other things. All right, so now switching to my role at Dolphin Quest, it's a mix of a few different areas. I get to do research on wild populations still and research with the dolphins at Dolphin Quest. As Cedric mentioned, I do grants management. So Dolphin Quest gives out research grants each year, and I help manage that process and also try to look for interesting projects around the world that we can help support. And I really love the social aspect of that. We also collaborate with scientists that come to Dolphin Quest, 1 or 2 dozen each year, to do research with the dolphins. And I love that part of getting to work with these interesting researchers all around the world. And then also communicating the science both within our team so that when they talk to guests throughout the day, they have the best knowledge, and talking with legislators. And I just met with the environmental ministers of Bermuda, and it's really fun trying to convey the best science for conservation purposes. So a little bit about the grants. These are just a few of the grants we've awarded in the last couple of years under the General Science and Conservation Fund. And just to highlight a couple of them, this is a newer version of that same respirometer you saw and developed by a collaborator. And it was developed by working with the dolphins at Dolphin Quest, and now it's used in several stranding networks in the US to, in real time, be able to detect lung disease and triage animals that might need treatment, or say, this animal is a good candidate for immediate flotation back in the water. Also, drones, drones are always the rage. Our dolphins have participated in this project where we used the known age and length and morphometrics. They were able to ground truth their measurements by being able to physically measure the dolphins. And that's allowed them to figure out the age class of Hawaiian spinner dolphins. And this is some collaborators at University of Hawaii. And then lastly, we worked with a group who developed a new fixed wing drone to collect exhaled air for health assessments. And that first involved figuring out the blind spots where the drone could approach. That was with our Bermuda dolphins. And then modeling the exhaled blow to figure out where the drone needs to be, how much it needs, trying to suck in an exhaled ample sample in small cetaceans is incredibly challenging. And then here's one of our dolphins, after years of that work, being able to be in a very controlled path and collect that data. And this team was successful a couple months ago in Texas on wild dolphins. So it'll be really neat to see where that tool goes from here. We also, in 2022, started a fund focused on the most endangered small cetaceans. A quarter of whale and dolphin species are threatened with extinction. And these are just a few of the projects that we've supported in the last couple of years. We have a lot of projects focused on bycatch reduction, including a number of projects focused on Franciscana dolphins, Ganges River dolphins, the big fisheries, floating or gillnet fisheries in Sri Lanka, and a lot of them involve testing acoustic deterrent devices or LED light deterrent devices in controlled bycatch experiments to figure out if fishers can still catch the amount of fish they want without catching dolphins and sea turtles. And then also some projects, this is just one example of Franciscana rehab project that we've been involved with, and it's with a lot of collaborators, and it's just really neat to be able to try to help some of these projects get off the ground. I also wanted to mention I feel like the theme I keep coming back to is meeting great collaborators at conferences or out on the boat somewhere. And a group of us got together and created a matchmaking service between facilities and scientists who might want to work with marine mammals in human care that don't know where to start. So we started this organization, and I wanted to highlight it in part because if you go to the services page of marinemammalresearch.org, we collated a few different websites that talk about tips or advice for if you want to be a marine mammal researcher. And a lot of the tips are broadly applicable to marine science, not just marine mammals. So a few takeaways in conclusion. As you're able to, internships and volunteering are incredibly, incredibly valuable. You might make new collaborators or mentors or friends. You might find new skills and find out experiences that you do or don't like. And as much as possible, try to find a paid internship or experience. If that's not possible, then many of the programs will negotiate with you for free housing or some sort of, something to make it easier to do, and make sure you're coming away with a tangible skill from especially those unpaid internships if you're able to pursue one of those. I also wanted to talk about how the translatable nature, I feel like, don't shy away from terrestrial research. Taking pictures of birds translates to taking pictures of marine mammals. Many of the skills are translatable between terrestrial and marine research. And then I'd recommend really trying to focus on skill acquisition, making sure every semester or year you're, maybe learning a new software like R or ArcGIS for spatial data, or taking social science courses, learning boat handling, any tangible skill. And then thinking about trying different aspects of field work versus lab work versus data science. I love a mix of all three, but some people gravitate towards one or the other. And don't be afraid to veer lanes if you can, to try different things. And then conferences and networking can be really intimidating to start out with, but try to find some peers to go with you. And we love talking with students, and I think, yeah, I think you're more likely to have a positive experience than you think. And some of the best, experiences have led to being or arisen from just being next to the right person at a conference. And I can't state the importance of that enough. All right. That's all I have, and looking forward to the Q&A part later.
Thank you so much, Austin. This is wonderful. Wow. Well, so if you do have questions, please type in the chat or keep them down, and you ask just after Kara's presentation. We are going to have approximately 40 minutes for presentation, and then now let's move to Kara, who will be presenting. Before Kara presents, I will also mention that Kara is also the chair of the education session for the Society for Marine Mammalogy. For those of us here who are engaged in education for conservation, please, if you have questions, feel free to ask to Kara. Kara, you have the floor.
That's good. All right, thank you. Yeah, so I am very happy to be able to share my story with you guys all today. So yeah, I'll start at the beginning. I come from California, and kind of two places in California, between a city in the San Francisco Bay Area and then a more rural farm in Northern California. And so both of these places, they were close enough that growing up, we could go to the ocean a few times a year. And between those trips and documentaries, I was just obsessed with the ocean from a very early age. So at the age of like 5, or you can say 6 here, I knew I wanted to be a marine biologist when I grow up. At this point, that was because they work with killer whales, and killer whales were the coolest, but I knew that I wanted to be a marine biologist before I could even spell marine biologist. But then growing up, I was in a family that was very blue collar. No one in my family had gone to college. And I remember from an early age, my dad saying things like this, that college is for lazy people who just don't want to go to work. And it's just a way to like skirt out of responsibilities. And my dad has since come around. Observing me through time has made it very clear that this was not an accurate statement. And now he is very supportive of myself as a scientist. You can see here, he is modeling a poster tube that he made for me before a conference. But still growing up, this is kind of the mentality that I was around. A lot of the people in my community didn't go to college. And so between that and the fact that growing up, I never met a scientist. I never encountered a scientist until I was in college. During high school years, I struggled a lot, and I just didn't really see this as a possibility for like towards the end of my high school time. And then really in my senior year, I got very sick. I was in the hospital for a long period of time, and that period kind of covered when applications were due for college. And my dad, I'm very thankful now, just threw out 3 applications on my behalf to the closest school because we didn't know what was going to happen. And I'm so grateful for that now, because I ended up in what ended up being a really cool place. So I moved to California State University, East Bay, to do my undergrad, which is in a very illustrious Hayward, California. And there I actually started pre-med because I was thinking I had a very hard time at the hospital. My mom had a lot of medical issues, and I just didn't see being a marine biologist as something that was feasible. And so I was there, but in my first year of my undergrad biology courses, I met two TAs that were amazing, that were master's students, and they were in a lab, and their lab was looking for research assistants, undergraduates. And so they convinced me to come out and apply for that, and I did. And I was so happy that I did, because I joined the group of Jim Murray, who is here in this picture. And the woman on the right is Darcy, and she's the one who really pushed me to join this. And I'm so thankful for that experience, because I got in my second semester and started helping out in the lab. And here, this is a photo from what is called the invertebrate ball, where everyone dresses up as invertebrates. I'm a planaria. Before you get any other ideas, I was dressed up as a planaria here, but we did not work on planaria in this group. We worked on nudibranchs. And so these were not killer whales, but they were marine and they were super cool. And I was really excited to be able to start doing research on any species, really. And so even though we were in Hayward, we spent the summers up in Friday Harbor in Washington at the labs there. And it's a beautiful marine lab on an island in the Puget Sound. And there we got to do all sorts of cool studies with the slugs. I was mostly helping in my first year, but in my second year, the gym allowed me to have my own research project, where I got to do all sorts of really different, really crazy studies that were all related to the function of these little things on the front of the face of the sea slug. And we were trying to figure out, okay, we know this is an organ, but what does it do? And so I tried all sorts of things. I did genetic analyses. I did behavioral tests with Y mazes, where the slugs had to move through a Y maze, which is as frustrating as it sounds. And none of these were successful. So like Austin said, I tried a lot of things. None of them worked, but I learned a lot from that process. And so after graduating, I knew I wanted to stick with research, and I decided to do an internship. So I flew to South Africa, what my dad described as literally the furthest place I could end up on the globe away from where they were. And there I was in a 2-month internship where I was working doing land-based and boat-based tracking of whales and dolphins, small cetaceans in the area. And these are southern right whales. But the big star of this internship were the great white sharks. So we got to do all sorts of cool white shark work. We were doing, you would use a tuna head to kind of bring them up to the surface, as you see in the top left. And then once they're out of the water, their dorsal fin is out, then you can take photos, you can take lots of measurements to get an idea of how fast they're growing, who's who, and get all sorts of basic information on the white sharks in the area. So during this time, or during my bachelor's, I had been volunteering with the American Cetacean Society. So there was a San Francisco Bay chapter that existed. And during my undergrad, I decided to start a student chapter, which was a lot of fun, very frustrating at times to get people really motivated, but it was also a lot of fun to do that. And through that process, they led some seminars that were open to the public. And there I met these silly guys, and these guys they gave a talk that was on this story that was related to harbor porpoises in the San Francisco Bay. And so in SF Bay, we historically had porpoises, like in the 1930s and 40s. We know they were around, but then they left for 65 years. They were not in bay waters. And then starting in 2007, they started coming back again. And so these guys were following that story and decided to launch a research program to understand why they left, why they're back, what are they doing here, who is here, and getting answering all these basic questions about this really interesting story. And so I was hooked. As a young student, I came running up to them after. I just wanted to ask them a bunch of questions. And then especially John, who's on the rightmost here, he was just like, you should come and do a master's with us. And that's what I did. So as soon as I came back from South Africa, I moved to San Francisco literally the next day, and then started my master's working with John Stern, who is an amazing supervisor. And so there I started working with marine mammals for the first time, with harbor porpoises. And then my co-supervisor, Ellen Hines, was also involved with that project. And so, yeah, this was the first marine mammal I started working with in a serious capacity. It was a bit of a jump moving from nudibranchs to marine mammals, and a very different situation, very different study methods. But there it was built on a lot of the work I did during my internship, because we were doing a lot of photo ID. So we did photo identification of the porpoises by boat. It's also really interesting there, the Golden Gate Bridge, at least historically, you could do photo ID from the bridge itself. So we had this permanent transect that we could use over and over again, and to get an idea of when porpoises are coming in and how they're using the bay. And it wasn't just porpoises that came back. Bottlenose dolphins also returned to the bay, and so we were doing photo identification of them as well. And also now there are whales that come back every year, humpback and gray whales coming into the bay again. So yeah, it's a really interesting story. For my master's project specifically, I was working with energetics, but doing mathematical modeling of energetics, so more simulation. So for that, what we wanted to see is, now we know that porpoises are coming back. One of the ideas of why they left was that there wasn't enough food for them in the bay, because there were these periodic massive fish die-offs that were happening. There was a lot of stuff going on. And so now that they're back, we wanted to see how much food do they actually need to be able to survive here in the bay. So to do that, we came up with some equations that could describe how they use energy related to just like their basic maintenance costs, also their cost to keep warm, to move around, for reproduction, for growth, and then use the sightings data to try and estimate how many animals and kind of the makeup of the animals that were in the bay around the year. And then we could use that to estimate the potential ingestion needs of the animals. But then after completing my master's, I knew I had fully had the bug. I wanted to do a PhD. And so I started hunting. And that was definitely a lot easier said than done. And I had maybe 6 months in between the time that I finished my master's and I started my PhD. I followed a few leads that seemed really promising, but ended up being dead ends. And so during that time, I was working in a high school, and I was also going out on a whale watching boat, collecting data for them. And that was super fun. I got to go out and see, whales out in nature around the Farallon Islands, and that could help keep my energy levels high enough to maintain all of the effort that was needed to hunt down an appropriate PhD program. And so during that time, also was trying to stay active and going to meetings, going to conferences, and I attended, there's the Society for Marine Mammalogy. They had a California student chapter conference that I went to. And it was there at the conference, I presented my master's work, and a woman, I met her after, and she had done a postdoc in Denmark before she moved to California. And she was just like, oh, why have you thought of Aarhus? Have you thought of Denmark for your PhD? And literally, I just had not thought that far at that point. It did not register. I didn't even consider that that was a possibility. And after that meeting, I looked into potential supervisors there. I reached out, sent a cold email, just, this is what I work on. Do you have anything that's interesting? I would love to do a PhD out there. And just like that, a few months later, I moved from California to Denmark to work with my PhD supervisors, Jakob Neben-Nielsen and Volker Grimm. And so a big pull, or a big drive for going to Denmark, was that there they have a lot of really cool data on harbor porpoises. They actually tag porpoises there. Off the West Coast, it would be a dream to be able to do the stuff that they do here with harbor porpoises. So they have all sorts of really great data sets, and long-term stranding data sets, really nice information for building these kind of bioenergetic models. And so what I did is I took kind of the basic mathematical formulation that I came up with in my master's, and then applied it in a more dynamic setting, because that model basically says, this is how much food porpoises could need, but it doesn't say what happens when they don't get that amount of food. So that's super important if we're looking at things like how disturbances might affect their ability to meet their needs. We need to have a method for estimating those kind of effects. So that's what I did in my PhD. Now, how the model kind of works is that the animals move around in the environment, they forage, they digest